Once the Premiership Cup has been presented and the juggernaut that is the AFL trade period slams to a halt, discussions around rule changes becomes the next item on the football media agenda. As reported by The Age, market research suggests that fans want to see the game opened up and scoring opportunities increased. At the same time, however, the strong message from supporters has been, stop changing the rules. Faced with this seemingly unresolvable paradox, the AFL have surprised many this off-season by introducing 3 new rules for the 2021 season. 2 of these areas, kick-ins and interchange caps, have already been discussed at length and build on other recently introduced changes. Eyebrows were raised though at the new man on the mark rule, which arrived with very little public discussion but does have the potential to be the most impactful of all these changes. So why does the AFL expect these rules to create a more open game? And just how successful can we expect them to be in altering the current state of play? Player interchanges. The interchange cap controls how many player rotations a team can make on and off the bench every game. In 2021, this will decrease from 90 to 75, equating to an average of 3.75 less rotations per quarter. The 75 divided amongst the quarters comes out to just over 18 rotations, meaning you could bring every single player off the field at some stage. Football operations boss Steve Hocking has asserted these changes are an attempt to open up congestion around the ground. This is supposed to be achieved by increasing fatigue. Of course, less rotations means less opportunity for any one player to rest off the field, and the theory is that tiring out players will lead to a decrease in pressure intensity. Poor execution of pressure upon the ball carrier and difficulty in continuously shifting defensive zones around the ground, the AFL hopes, will lead to an increase in scoring. There are a lot of high pressure game styles which have kicked in. The pressure factors have increased, and have been on the increase for 5 years now. So our belief is we need to put a little bit of fatigue back into the system, Hocking stated. Another factor that should assist in creating fatigue is the return to longer quarters. It's still open for debate as to what length quarters the AFL will decide on, although they have admitted it won't be 16 minutes. And the general sentiment shared by fans and broadcasters is a return to 20. This interchange cut is the latest in a string of changes the AFL has made in recent years, and since rotations were first capped in 2014, stats show the game has failed to open up. While it can be difficult to analyse the impact of rotations in isolation, scoring continues to decline, and the contested possession rate, an indicator of congested play, has remained stable. The AFL, however, continues to persevere with the strategy, and it appears that if the subtraction of 15 doesn't have a large enough impact, they'll keep slashing the rotations until the desired result is achieved. Player on the mark. Perhaps the most surprising rule was to restrict the movement of the player on the mark to 1 metre on either side. The hope is that this will make it easier for teams to kick into the corridor. We think that will open up the game. It will open up the 45-degree angle pass option, which is the best real estate, Hocking explained. To illustrate the impact of this 45-degree kick, consider an out of bounds on the full free kick taken on the wing. The mark in this instance is the point on the boundary line the ball crossed, but you'll never see an AFL player standing there. Instead, the player on the mark moves inboard, aiming to block off dangerous space in the corridor and force a kick down the line. The AFL hopes that by effectively trapping a player in a wider position, it will be easier for teams to move the ball inboard from wide areas and attack in a more dangerous manner. As soon as a kick comes in, a wider range of attacking options become possible, such as a switch to the fat side, or further short 45-degree passes that work the ball forward. Another significant aspect of this rule change is the fact the mark cannot be substituted. Previously, it was not uncommon to see a player such as a half forward come from behind the play and mend the mark, releasing a defender or midfielder to push back into defence and clog up space. It's also possible that from time to time we'll see ruckmen and key defenders trapped on the mark, meaning they are unable to push back and intercept the ball, giving the attacking team a brief advantage. The new rule means that if teams can identify when a deep player is caught on the mark and move the ball quickly, they'll be presented with opportunities to catch out defences that are undermanned or out of position. While in theory there is scope for this to open up the game, it could inadvertently lead to more congestion during slow periods of play. When a forward comes to stand the mark, they're likely to stay high once the ball is kicked, and remain an option for a rebound if the ball turns over. But if a defender is trapped on the mark, it's possible we'll see teams instructing forwards to cover them in defence. Once the ball is kicked, it's likely the defender will roll back into their position, and if the forward becomes involved in the play, they will stay around the ball, both increasing congestion and limiting the options for a fast counter-attack. It could also mean a slight advantage to players kicking for goal. For example, Mason Cox will almost always come down to man the mark for a long-range shot, but he won't be able to replace a player in this situation. So if your little back pocket starts manning the mark, he has to stay there. The change also presents a challenge for the umpires. If we don't see the play-on rules strictly enforced, this rule could mean a disastrous amount of 50-metre penalties awarded, as the player on the mark will naturally roll inboard with the ball carrier. Having the success of this rule then placed largely on their enforcement perhaps places unreasonable pressure on the umpires, and much like the protected area rule, this one feels like it may need to be adapted over time, depending on how it's enforced. The mark pushback for kick-ins. In 2021, the man on the mark at kick-ins will be brought back to stand 15 metres from the goal square, an increase on the shift to 10 metres introduced in 2019. The idea is to help teams clear their defensive 50, but it's unclear whether this clears congestion or just shifts it to another part of the ground. In fact, the changes to kick-ins brought in for the 2019 season decreased the chance of the old 7-point play, and hence had a negative impact on scoring. Per the AFL record in 2018, the team defending a kick-in was twice as likely to score from a turnover than the team kicking out was to go score at the other end in that chain of play, or in other words, without a stoppage. After the rule changes in 2019, teams who intercepted an opposition kick-in chain scored 22% of the time, down from 26% in 2018. However, there was no corresponding increase in scores from kick-ins. The new rules made it easier for teams to clear their backline, but not necessarily easier to score goals, as zones simply dropped deeper to compensate for longer kick-ins. An extra 5 metres given to the man on the mark is unlikely to alter this trend, so at the end of the day, the success of this rule will likely rest on what criteria you choose to judge it by. If your objective is to purely increase scoring, further decline in repeat scores means the rule will likely fail. If the aim is to help teams clear defence and shift the contest to the middle of the ground, then the rule will likely build on the successes the previous changes introduced in this area. This change could also be seen as a discouragement to methodically kicking out of defence. The AFL are essentially saying, here's lots of open space, run into it and kick the ball long. Whereas a chip to space in the pocket will likely not do much to shift deep-sitting zones. While these 3 rules can be thought of as more tweaks than out-and-out changes, the AFL is also set to trial a more extreme zone-style adjustment in the new East Coast second-tier competition. These trials will be watched with great interest, and if we don't see an increase in AFL scoring this year, more radical change could be just around the corner.